6 prominent medical groups are suing Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over recent vaccine policy changes. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Public Health Association are among the coalition suing the federal government. They say the decision to remove COVID-19 vaccines from the list of recommended vaccines for healthy children and pregnant women was unlawful. They claim Kennedy bypassed the usual process for making changes. The medical groups want the court to stop the federal government from enforcing and publicizing the new recommendations and to restore the previous ones.
Joining us this morning, our chief legal analyst, Khalif Rhodes. So is this not just letting parents choose? Is this a legal issue like these groups are claiming? Where's sort of the middle or the fine line here?
It's a couple of things. And so, yes, you talked about the 6 organizations that are bringing claim, but it's not just the fact that they've made these COVID-19 recommendations, right? They also removed the 17 members of the advisory committee on immunization on the CDC, and they limited support for COVID vaccines to folks that are 65 plus. So there are a number of things that they're asking regarding the COVID removal or recommendation to remove it. That's a violation, or they're alleging it's a violation of the American Administration Procedure Act. Specifically, if you're trying to do something in the rulemaking process, you typically have to give notice and give folks an opportunity to be heard. You're saying, hey, I'm this agency, say it's going to be the FDA or the CDC or whatever it is, we're going to make this proposed rule change. There'll be a notice, a window for you to speak, have comments, get questions, have concerns. We'll give you feedback during that window, that rulemaking question process. They'll make changes, they'll make amendments, they'll send it back out for another question and answer session, and then at some point they'll formulate and promulgate a rule and kick it out. They're saying none of that happened in this situation. Kennedy was like, we're just going to get rid of it, and so we got rid of it. They're saying that violated the process. Because it violated the process, there was no notice, there was no rulemaking procedure. Yes, this was a violation of this normal standard while how you go through it. And we've seen this before. Any one of the alphabet soup of agencies, when they go through a rulemaking process, is typically going to be a longer process. The most recent one I could think about is when we had the bump stocks. It went through the bump stocks for the guns. That process was a long process, tons of questions, millions of responses. It made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court after a rule was promulgated, but there was notice, there was an opportunity to be heard, and that did not happen here. That's going to be the biggest portion. And so when you talk about an injunction, that's what they're asking. It's not about parents making the decision. It's more about the guidance that they're giving to doctors, but it's also the fear that doctors, because one of the folks, not just these groups, it's a physician who's a pregnant woman that's saying the guidance you're giving is now putting my pregnancy at risk. And so she has standing to at least bring this claim. But when you go through the analysis of the injunction, the standard of likelihood of success on the marriage, this irreparable harm where money can't fix it. Well, if something happens to your pregnancy, in this woman's case, you can't pay her to fix that. So that's that irreparable harm that she's addressing. But I'd like to see how the court weighs in on this, because this rendition of the Supreme Court has really attacked the alphabet soups in terms of their ability to formulate and promulgate rules, period.
Right.
And so I think that they would be inclined to say, hey, go do what you want in terms of making rules or not, even though this Administrative Procedure Act has been there for years.
Well, I was going to ask, and you kind of talked about there, the irreparable harm, because obviously the pregnant doctor, they're saying this would not only impact my ability to care for my child, but also my patients. If I'm recommending a vaccine, I don't have access to the medicine needed that I'm recommending, I can't help my patients. I can't practice as a doctor. Do you think that's enough, even with the current makeup of the Supreme Court? I know it's not there yet, but would this be enough for the courts to say, okay, we see the damage, irreparable harm, yes, you have a temporary injunction or preliminary injunction?
Crystal ball for sure would say it goes to U.S. District Court. U.S. District Court grants the injunction, because that standard is to be able to get an injunction, and I've said it before, is extraordinary relief. So the courts don't want to give injunctions.
Right.
But I think if you can meet the standard of, the public policy is in public interest, we don't want people having pregnancies where they can't get the type of care they need. So I think it checks that box. Irreparable harm, you don't want babies being harmed in the process, so it checks that box. And the likelihood of success in a marriage, well, if you can point to the precedent, the history of how the courts have applied the Administrative Procedure Act in the past, I think you would check that box. In the lower court, I think it's clear that an injunction would be placed. Now, when we get to the Court of Appeals, it depends on the panel, it depends on the type of judges that hear the case. And then when it gets to the Supreme Court, I really think, I don't know. It's sad to say that, because if this would have been prior to the Trump administration, and first rendition, not the second one, but the first rendition, I think this court would have been inclined to rule in favor of the administrations and the administrative ability to do this rulemaking and follow the rules. Or if someone would have failed to follow the rules, the person bringing the claim would have had a clean, easy shot to getting it struck down. In Kennedy's defense, what he'll say is, hey, I have authority to do this. I am, over this. I am the secretary. I have the sole discretion to make these decisions. I think anyone that with plain reading of the Administrative Procedure Act say you have the ability to make the recommendations, but you have to give notice, you have to have a hearing, you have to have the public have an opportunity to give input.
Well, and Kennedy also, we know that he fired the expert panel, put his own advisors in. Some, may or may not have ties, anti-vax ties there. Is that a red flag legally? Or just maybe frowned upon?
I think it goes back to his original comment, because he said that before, that the replacement of the ACIP board would be not all anti-vaxxers, in that this needs to be cleaned up. The only way that we can clean up the vaccine issues that he believes are there is that you need to do a full gutting of the board. That was his response, and I think it goes back to his discretion. So there's nothing illegal for him to remove the whole board. It's probably not advised. That's what these 6 groups are saying, that you have these folks that are experts that have the scientific backing to support what they're saying. You probably don't want to remove all the experts from there. But what Kennedy has shot back at that as well. And he said, well, there's no scientific data to support what you guys are asking me to do. So he's saying, show me the numbers, show me the science that supports keeping these mandated requirements. So I think there is a back and forth there, but historically you wouldn't remove an entire board. You may remove a couple individuals and kind of form the board in the manner in which you want, but no violation there. And I think if they're attempting to get the court to give declaratory judgment to say he doesn't have authority to remove the members, I think they lose there. But if they are asking the court, which they are, regarding the procedure and them not following the Administrative Procedure Act, I think that one is a pretty cut and dry. So the court could give a mixed opinion and say, well, grant it here, but we won't give you declaratory judgment here. Basically saying, declare that he's not allowed to do that. I don't think they're right in that request, but they are clearly on point with the other requests.
All right, remains to be seen what happens in court. Again, our chief legal analyst, Khalif Rhodes. Khalif, thank you. We'll have you back next hour to talk about the ongoing drama around Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.